Welcome to Moran 08990 at students.mccarthy.org news station. I'm your host, Moran, the hostess with the mostest. Today's topic of the news will be Claude McKay, a legendary Harlem Renaissance poet and novelist. To begin our news telecast, we shall start off with a brief introduction and history of Claude McKay, and then end with an interview with Claude McKay. Stay tuned. Before I begin this interview, I'd like to do a brief summary of Claude McKay. Claude McKay is a Harlem Renaissance poet and novelist. He was born on September 15, 1889 in Sunnyvale, Jamaica, to peasant farmers Thomas Francis McKay and Anne Elizabeth Edwards McKay. Claude McKay spent a good portion of his life living in Jamaica and immigrated to the United States at the age of 23. His father, Thomas Francis McKay, was a descendant of the Ashanti tribe of West Africa and wanted Claude McKay to appreciate his black blood. His mother, Anne Elizabeth Edwards McKay, may have been of mixed blood since Claude McKay constantly describes her as being brown rather than black. Claude McKay's father's father was an enslaved African American, and Claude McKay's father often told Claude McKay about his grandfather's enslavement because he wanted his son to never forget about this. So now, let's turn it over to Liam Moran and Claude. Welcome back. Now let's welcome our guest. He's back from the dead. He's not a walker from the Walking Dead. He's Claude McKay.
Thank you, Liam. It's great to be back alive on your award-winning show.
Oh, stop it, Mr. McKay.
Please, you can call me Claude. My father was Mr. McKay.
Sure thing, Claude. So now, let's get down to business with this interview. So what was life like growing up in Jamaica?
Well, it's a lot different now than it was back in my day. Or at least that's what I've heard from. There's a lot of racism while I was growing up. And a lot of people were farmers and worked on the field, much like my parents.
What about your household? I heard you were the youngest of 11 siblings. That must have been pretty crazy.
Don't even get me started on that. We were always doing something in my household. My siblings, however, were all very loving and always made sure I was included. They taught me many life lessons as well.
That it was actually your oldest brother who inspired you to write, and he showed you what literature was because he was a school teacher.
Yes, he did. And I was very grateful for him. And also my good friend, Mr. Edward Jekyll, because if it wasn't for them, I would never become the man I was. And especially because they showed me what real literature was and inspired me to keep on doing it.
Back to you growing up. Did you have any jobs while you were in Jamaica?
Well, I'd always worked around the farm. And at the age of 19, I moved to Kingston and joined the Kingston Police Force.
Ooh, a policeman. That must have been super exciting.
Well, exciting wouldn't be the word I'd use to describe my time as a policeman.
Well, then how would you describe being a policeman?
Being a policeman in Kingston was a lot of work. However, while I was there, I witnessed a lot of racism.
Now, I'm assuming you didn't stay there too long?
You're right. I quit the job about a year after and moved to Brownstown, Jamaica. While in Brownstown, I was able to reflect on everything that had happened to me in my life so far, and I was also able to rediscover my love of literature, which had been hidden.
On the topic of literature, tell us about the first two collections you wrote, The Songs of Jamaica and the Constable Ballads.
Well, those two collections, The Songs of Jamaica and the Constable Ballads, were mainly about earth and nature, and Jamaican poverty and racism, which I had experienced firsthand.
It says that you even won an award for both of these collections.
Yes, I did in fact win an award from the Jamaican Institute of Arts and Sciences. I was also the first African American to have received this prestigious award.
Wow, that's quite the accomplishment, my friend. Now I would assume you would have gotten some kind of, cash prize money? Did you?
I did in fact receive a sum of money that I used towards moving to the United States of America.
Now, while you were traveling Europe for those 11 years, I'd heard you written 3 books, Home to Harlem, Banjo, and Banana Bottom. Now, you'd written all those books in Marseilles, France. Is there any sort of significance to that city that caused you to, write those books or anything?
Yes, well, the country of France is magnificent. It's full of life, and while I was in Marseilles, I was just inspired by everything around me to write those 3 collections.
Home to Harlem was quite the story. I in fact remember reading that in my 11th grade English class. Quick shout out to Mr. Ramirez, back home at Archbishop Edward A. McCarthy.
Yes, it was indeed a great story. It actually earned a bestseller, and it was the first time an African American had a accomplished that bestseller achievement. So I was very proud of that and felt very accomplished.
The next question is, how do you think the U.S. changed when you had arrived back from Europe after those 11 years?
Well, when I left the U.S. in 1922, the African American movement was in full effect, and when I returned in 1933 from Europe, the African American movement had been somewhat pushed aside due to the Great Depression.
So what did you end up doing after you arrived back home to the U.S.?
I had settled down in Harlem, and then later moved to Chicago, and focused on writing my own autobiography. I also looked into different religions and explored my faith. Roman Catholicism, which I absolutely adore and I am a huge supporter of, was the one I decided was the religion for me.
I tried to get into this part since the beginning of the interview, but it says here, on May 22nd, 1948, that you died in a Chicago hospital due to a heart failure. I mean, it's pretty rough.
Yes, I did, and I'm not bitter towards my death because I felt like it was my time to leave this earth. I'm also very content with everything I have done and accomplished because I feel like I have set the tone for many African Americans and other people to follow my path in literature.
I don't know if you heard this, but 5 years after your death, one of your collections had been published called Selected Poems, and it had received amazing reviews. Props to you.
I'd always hoped that that collection of poems would have gotten published. I thought it was amazing work.
Well, Claude, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on the show for this interview. I wish you all the best in your future, even though you're kind of dead.
Oh man, I was having so much fun.
I know, man. So was I.
Thank you so much for having me on this interview, and I wish you the best in your future, Liam. Stay handsome.
Thank you, Claude. Ladies and gentlemen, Claude McKay. Thank you all for staying tuned in this interview. I hope you all learned a great portion about Claude McKay and his life throughout the Harlem Renaissance. I'm Liam Moran, signing off. Stay classy. I've dreaded getting to this part since the beginning of the interview, but on May 22nd, 1949.
Well, thank you so much. For having me on this interview. I was so much